Welcome to Trekzone Live, another week of doing this live show across Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. We are live, genuinely live, producing live at least, this uncut edition of Talkin Science. We're going to be bringing you the deep dives into the stories of the week, as well as the headlines, the whole Talkin Science half-hour show, which is very, very exciting. If you subscribe to Trekzone on YouTube and ring the notification bell, you'll get notifications when we release these individual episodes through the week. But hey, I'm glad you're here for the live show because the mystery of a vanishing planet, an exoplanet, Iran launching its first military satellite, and asteroid 1998 OR2 came really, really close on Wednesday. They're the stories that we're going to be covering today with Dr. Brad Tucker. He's standing by on this playback over here. It's Saturday, May 2, 2020. Let's get into it.
Across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube, this is Talking Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
A very happy quarantine Tuesday to you, Dr. Brad Tucker.
I'm looking forward to when we don't have to say that.
Well, I mean, we could stop saying it right now. Really.
Oh, no. It's more the underlying story behind it. Let's say that. It's going to be a long 2020.
Oh, it is a long 2020 at the moment. I should actually ask, how are you today?
Oh, I'm all right. Winter is coming to Canberra, let's say that, this week, so everyone's getting prepared for 0 and potentially sub-zero temperatures overnight. So
is this the part where I say it's going to, we're bracing for the winter up here as well. It's going to be a balmy 9 degrees overnight.
Yeah.
A freezing 9 degrees.
Freezing 9 degrees, yeah.
Talking Science headlines.
And Brad, your favourite topic that we bring up in the headlines, SpaceX's Starlink. Another successful launch, another batch of satellites up there, totaling 400 now.
That's right. It was another successful launch, which was good on them, but there's definitely videos starting to emerge. In fact, there's a video taken from the ISS, the Space Station for astronauts, seeing the satellite trails and the trains of them happening. And another video of an astronomer, people are now seeing multiple trains over the course of a morning or a night, because you have the first launch coming by and then the second launch coming by. So it's a growing issue.
And Hubble, we celebrated its 30th anniversary on Saturday, but it's to mark that occasion, it's given us the birthday present, a brand new image.
It was. It's a fantastic image, calling a tapestry of blazing starbirth. It's an amazing image to see an area where stars are being born, but a very different take on it. And, it is... words cannot describe how it looks, I would say.
It is absolutely incredible. For those of our audience watching us on YouTube in our visually enhanced version of the podcast, can see this image. I've got it up on the screen now. It is absolutely incredible, breathtaking to think that this image, there is so much happening in this image.
This is the area where stars are being born. This is gas that has left a dying star. It's being cooled down and colliding. And when you see these colors, you're seeing the different elements, the different literally building blocks going into these star systems, these new star systems that will not only just have the stars forming in it, but the planets as well. And it's just, another image that highlights how powerful Hubble is, as we talked about last week.
Talking Science, stories of the week.
And our first story of the week for our Tuesday main show. This will be happening on our Wednesday deep dive story of the week, and of course our first story on our live show. Surprise! There's a live show on Saturdays now as well. But don't worry, Brad. You don't have to do anything but hang around with me on a Tuesday as we record. Wednesday night, Australian time, asteroid 1998 OR2 is going to be skimming past the planet at 6.2 million kilometers away.
Yeah, it's a close shave, as they say in space terms. and look, this firstly poses no harm. I know the way 2020 seems like it's going, that asteroid is the next on your bingo card, but you can't cross it off yet. It will pass safely 16 times the distance the moon is away from the Earth. But it is labeled a potentially Earth hazardous asteroid. It meets the criteria of both size and distance from the Earth. That is one that we definitely keep an eye on.
When we say that it's 6.2 million, it's going to pass 6.2 million kilometres away. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor in that it's 4 kilometres long and it's travelling at 36,000 kilometres an hour, there is serious cause for concern here, isn't there?
Yeah, it is a big thing that we worry about. To put in a scale, the normal shooting star you see is about the size of a grain of sand, maybe a small pebble. We worry being that it can create some damage, usually small, when it reaches that 8 to 10 meter mark. So a big one.
Meter.
That's like what we.
Meter.
Yeah, meter. That's like the one we saw over Chelyabinsk in Russia.
Wow.
A number of years ago. Yeah, the one that everyone's like, hey, there's lots of destruction, explosions. That was in 10 meters. When we get to the 1,000 times bigger scale, the kilometer scale, that's the one where, look, we have to pay attention to this. It needs to be tracked. And so one of the important things of this pass by is this one does come around the Earth every couple decades. It was first discovered in 1998, hence the name. So we like to get as much information of it as possible, its size, measurements, its rotation, how fast it's rotating, its speeds, as you said, and better updates of its orbit, so we know if there should be any closer shaves in the future.
Well, this flyby coming up is the asteroid's closest flyby in at least a century. So as you say, it's going to give us this data that we need to better predict it in the future.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what it's all about, is making sure that these ones that we know are potentially hazardous. Hazardous being the range is about 7.5 million kilometers when we classify it as potentially hazardous, and above 100-ish meters. That's the hazardous range. So this definitely beats both of those. And so, as you said, it's going to come around again. And I think the next close approach is in 2079, when it's definitely much closer than it is this approach now. Again, still quite far away, but we want to do it because there's also something it's never really mentioned when we worry about these things, is we also not just worry about the Earth, but we worry about the moon as well, this slamming into the moon, because it would affect the Earth-moon system.
And that would be pretty catastrophic if the moon was to be knocked out of our orbit, which is probably an extreme example, or even knocked closer to the Earth in orbit.
That's right. If it shifts, if a bunch of it leaves, that affects the tides and our rotation. So it does have a very physical change here on Earth if the moon is hit. And the moon is much smaller. The moon is about the size of Australia, for instance. It's just shy of 3,000 kilometers. The Earth is about 12,000 kilometers. So at 4 kilometers, it's much smaller than either of these objects. But what happens if a really big one happens to hit either of these things, or a few of them, or just those right set of circumstances? So now our margin of worrying is not just the 12,000 kilometer Earth, but really the 400,000 kilometer range the Earth and Moon is. And so that's a bigger area to think about and cover.
And in the next decade, we're going to have permanent settlements on the Moon as well. So they're going to be at even more of a risk than, say, we necessarily would be here on Earth, with a nice little atmosphere to try and cushion most of the blow.
That's right. That's why you see all those craters in the Moon. That's just rock. The same rocks that hit our Earth, but mostly they burn up in Earth's atmosphere. And so it either burns it up completely, or at least mostly slows it down and reduces it so it's small, or it lands in our oceans or Antarctica, uninhabited places. We do worry about that on the Moon. A smaller one does more damage on the Moon than it does here on Earth. So it is something that we have to pay attention to. These are not abstract things that we make up. There are lots of these things out there, and lots of big ones. And this isn't near the size of the dinosaurs. The dinosaur one we think was about 180 kilometers. So this is still much smaller than that, but it is still in the range of, you don't want to be under it if it comes at the Earth. That's my professional opinion.
Take it to the bank, everybody.
That's right.
Well, of course, asteroid 1998 OR2 was passed on Wednesday. We're now in Saturday, which means we survived, which is absolutely fantastic. Welcome back to Trekzone Live. This is the live installments of our Producing Live, the uncut Talkin Science edition. I'm Matt Miller, and let's keep going. Right now, Brad and I are going to be chatting about Iran and their first military satellite. Iran has launched its first military satellite into orbit. This is sort of an escalation of what we were talking about last week with this sort of arms race in space once again. Last week, Russia was launching anti-satellite missile tests. This week, Iran with their first military satellite.
Yeah, look, it's exactly on par with what we were saying. And saying kind of when Space Force was just starting that this would create a growth. It is not to say that Iran hadn't been planning this. It takes years to build a rocket and a satellite. But there's obviously a push to assert dominance in space and show that these players are it. And it's not to say this isn't Iran's first satellite launch. It's launched multiple before, but this purely was for the Iran defense military aspect in low Earth orbit. And it is part of a growing thing that if control is not established, not of Iran, but of the whole thing, it could get out of control quite quickly. And I think we're starting to see elements of that.
This launch has successfully ended a series of setbacks for the nation's space program. So in one way, this is a good thing from a scientific standpoint, but from this militaristic standpoint, it is quite a large cause for concern. And I guess the biggest thing as well is that we don't know necessarily what this satellite is all about, what it's going to be up to.
That's right. You want programs to grow their space. There's lots of reasons why it helps, and the infrastructure that's provided helps every day. And space, as we've talked about, is hugely important. For instance, things like bushfires and water here in Australia and other places. But yeah, when the focus is on purely military and you don't know what it's doing, and the technology's out there and it's becoming more and more accessible, you do worry about the focus and what's going to happen. And as we talked about last week, not the things that are intentional, but also the things that are unintentional, the accidents that may happen in space, the things that go awry, and the conflicts that it then creates here on Earth when there's already conflicts here on Earth. It's not to sound alarmist, but it's a growing area that it seemed like this is out of sight, out of mind thing that people don't necessarily have to worry about, but we kind of do.
Well, having said that we don't know what this satellite is, Al Jazeera did report that it's a military reconnaissance satellite, which can carry a whole gamut of mission parameters, I guess. So yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's a fairly wide term for just something that does something looking at the ground, something. It's kind of like the fill your own adventure stories here. That's what these reconnaissance means. You can really put anything in and it could do it.
It is getting absolutely crowded up there in planetary orbit as Russia launches anti-satellite missiles, testing them, of course. Iran's launching military satellites. The US has Space Force. Australia's about to enter the race as well. It's getting pretty hairy up there. Let's hope that we learn the lessons from the last time that we were doing all of this during the Cold War. But let's move on to a lighter topic now. Wrapping up our week, Dr. Brad Tucker and I are chatting about the mystery of a vanishing exoplanet.
Talking Science, Stories of the Week.
Alrighty, well, our last story of the week is a vanishing exoplanet.
Put another tick in the Hubble Space Telescope column here. Fomalhaut B, this was what was believed to be the first exoplanet directly image. So not where we see the planet passing in front of the star and the light changing or bending of light, that it was kind of a direct image, just as the way we can see Venus in the early evening skies, or in the early morning skies, you can see Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. And so Hubble has been imaging this for quite a few years now, as to see its orbit, to try and measure other measurements and parameters of the planet. But what they've noticed is the clump of light that was from this planet is getting puffier and puffier. And it appears that this planet does not exist and maybe never fully existed in the way we thought.
This one is very cool because Hubble first spotted it in 2004, and as you say, has been keeping close tabs on it. And as we can see in this image here of gradually this dissipation of the light from 2004 to 2014. With that in my mind, looking at that clearly is a planetary explosion. But astronomers can't just come to that conclusion, can they, Brad? They have to have evidence to back it up.
That's right. You have to test all the other options that it could be. And so this is where repeated observations in different types, different telescopes, really try and help it put it together. But it does appear to be conclusive. And so you also use a lot of modeling, a lot of physics to see what other options could create something like we're seeing, and what other evidence would produce that we can help rule or not rule it out. But it does end up being kind of clear that something dramatically happened, and a planetary collision in the truest sense. And if it goes back to it, we think this is actually more common than we may think, going back to the moon and how the moon was formed in our own solar system, and seeing evidence of this in other planets now where they've seen lots of dust, infrared. So this is very bright in infrared colors. So having something like this where when you can put it together and say, all right, what other things can we draw on, does make it seem quite unique, but also quite, I guess, important that this is one of the first ones that's been pinpointed as it's a direct image of the planetary system, and yet it is maybe the end of a planetary system, or just never fully formed in these solar systems that are quite chaotic and things crashing around. Maybe it never formed and it broke up before it actually came together.
Based on the researching the density of the debris disk, there's an estimate that a smash up like this should happen about every 200,000 years. So it's an incredible stroke of good luck that Hubble was just looking in that direction at that time for this very exciting observation.
Yeah, this is kind of, I think, one of the always interesting things about astrophysics, especially when we're looking at things that this timescales are thousands and millions and billions of years. So you can look at it two ways. You can look at enough of these so you stack the odds in your favor. So, if it happens every 200,000 years, if we look at 200,000 planetary systems per year, hopefully we get one per year, right? You could stack the odds in your favor, or you just get lucky. And then you think of all the things that happen on longer timescales that we just haven't been lucky to witness, and those critical pieces of evidence or information that we just haven't seen because we haven't looked for long enough, or far enough, or deeper enough, or wider enough. And this is always the great thing about looking into space, is when you build a new telescope or instrument, there's always the things that you don't know that you want to go understand. And then there's the things you don't know that you never knew, that when you look at it, you're like, oh, there's a whole new thing here. It's a whole new world. And then it turns into a whole new set of inquiry and testing. And this is a great example of this.
And lastly, Brad, on this one, the debris field is thin and dispersed now, something that Hubble's, as we've talked about, has tracked over the last decade and a little bit. It's now around 1 AU, 1 astronomical unit in length, which is about the size of the Earth to the Sun. There's some scale involved here.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of the entire almost Mercury, Venus, Earth, all the way to the Sun. That's this debris field. So it was a huge explosion, but this is exactly when we see young stars and the planets forming around them. It is a really wide field of debris and gas and dust swirling around it that eventually clumps down. So it's definitely a snapshot of matches into what we think goes on into these planetary systems. And I think it's quite interesting because, going back to every 200,000 years and how big this is, things, we think of the universe as this thing that doesn't really change, but it's actually quite chaotic. And there's a lot of things dynamically happening, and collisions forming and explosions happening, that the universe is a motion and process. And as we're stuck in quarantine, the universe keeps going regardless of what we do.
Well, Brad, as I say every week, it's fantastic to pick apart the stories of the week. Everyone can find you on Twitter at btucker22, on Facebook, Dr. Brad Tucker. Your educational live streams are continuing. They're very informative. They're there for the kids all around the world, and you're doing some great stuff. I saw you had a little a colouring in.
That's right. You can colour in one of the telescopes we have at Sighting Spring, and tomorrow on Wednesday it will be all about black holes, and that video will be online recorded. So so they'll keep coming, and there's no restriction on age. Big kids are welcome as well as young kids.
Hey, I'm watching the live streams as well. I'm a big kid.
Hey, we don't discriminate on age.
And of course, you can find Trekzone on social media. Just search for Trekzone. You can find me on Twitter at Miramat86. Dr. Brad Tucker, thanks so much, and we'll do it again next week.
Sounds good.
Well, there we go. That's how we do Talkin Science live on Saturdays. It's produced live, and it's the uncut edition of the show. The deep dives into the stories of the week that we bring you on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And, of course, parts of the main show on Tuesday as well. Don't forget to subscribe to Trekzone across all of social media. Just search for Trekzone. You'll find us. We're on podcasts as well. Just, again, search for Trekzone or a Trekzone conversation. You'll find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Tuned In, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and wherever else. In fact, I'm pretty sure Blueberry looks after us that way. Wherever you get your podcasts, we should be there. If not, well, drop us a line and I'll try and make it happen. And, of course, YouTube here as well. We've got the enhanced visual presentations of our audio podcasts on YouTube at the same time as those podcasts are released. So that's at youtube.com/trekzone.org.au. Subscribe over there. Ring the bell to get notifications. It gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling on the inside. Well, there we go. That is Talkin Science live this Saturday, May 2, 2020. We're out of here. We'll catch you on Monday for another edition of a Trekzone Conversation. Talkin Science on Tuesday to Friday and Trekzone Live next Saturday. I'm Matt Miller. Thanks so much for watching.